So you've mentioned all sorts of words joined together all around the same thing. So you've used survival, bushcraft, outdoor living, edibles. Is that all bushcraft, or is bushcraft something else?
I would say if you want a definition of bushcraft from me, the best one that I can give you is that it's a skill set that you use when you choose to be in the outdoors, as opposed to wanting to get home. Where survival is more aimed at, staying alive until you can get out of there. Now, I think a lot of survival skills are actually a subset of bushcraft skills. I think a lot of survival is encompassed by bushcraft, not all of it, particularly at the more technological end of modern survival. I think maybe some of that isn't bushcraft, particularly at the military end, when you're talking about, types of beacons and UV, and infrared beacons and all sorts of things, and specialist signaling devices and all those sorts of things. That's very much, escape, it's kind of the escape and evasion, the seer end of survival. But I think in terms of use of natural resources, I would say that the survival skills sit within bushcraft, because they're the same skills. The context is just different. If you need to make water safe, if you need to light a fire, if you need to make a signal fire, whatever, it's the same skill set. It's just the big difference is what's going on in your head in those situations, whether you're lighting a fire at the end of a day's canoeing in Algonquin on a lovely autumn's day, and you're there and you're well fed and you're not injured and you're not scared and people know where you are. That's very different to lighting a fire if you need it to stop your mate dying from hypothermia, or creating a signal fire or what have you, because you want to be rescued. The mental stresses there are very different, but the actual fundamental skill set in terms of using the natural materials are exactly the same. So I would say a lot of survival skills are encompassed within bushcraft. I wouldn't say that bushcraft is encompassed within survival. Bushcraft really is something that makes the outdoors home. So if particularly where they draw on indigenous skills, where all the bushcraft skills draw on indigenous skills, we all used to live in the middle of nature all the time. Nature is not against us. It's not for us. It's just there. And it's up to us with our skills and our knowledge and our understanding of what's going on around us to make ourselves comfortable and be at home there. We're an animal. And we were very good at living in nature for a long time. And now we've got very good at doing other things and maybe not so good at living in nature, many of us. But, fundamentally, there's no reason why we can't be completely comfortable with a skill set and a certain knowledge base out in nature. And a lot of what I think is transposed into bushcraft are elements of that. And then you've got the other thing that you've got is this, and Lisa Fenton is somebody that's done a good job of bringing this to the fore. Dr. Lisa Fenton, who some listeners might know from, she's the co-chair of the next Global Bushcraft Symposium with me. She's been on my podcast talking about these things as well. But one of the things that she's sort of highlighted is the sort of expeditionary, the colonial kind of nature of some of what's in bushcraft. We got to a certain point with, particularly when you start thinking about, Robert Rogers and the French and Indian War, you got to sort of expeditionary warfare, guerrilla warfare, right through to the Boer War. And then you got people like Baden-Powell coming back with those skills and starting the scouting movement. You've got people like Frederick Russell Burnham, who was a scout for the US military, but then went and fought in the Boer War for the British and had some contact with Baden-Powell as well. So you've got this sort of need to have these skills that can be transposed from one place to another, that can be carried with you. And a lot of them are influenced and draw on indigenous skills for those environments, but they need to be widely applicable as well. And I think a lot of what we teach in bushcraft now, certainly at the baseline, are widely applicable outdoor skills. Like, how do you make a fire? How do you make a bow drill set? How do you make cordage when you've got plant fibers? How do you navigate using nature's signs? How do you make water safe? Most of those things you can apply anywhere, as long as the material, the baseline materials are there. They're not so specific to particular natural resources that only occur in one place. And I think a lot of the baseline bushcraft skills are like that. And then of course you've got very, very much more specific skills in particular environments, like certain things you can only find in, I don't know, Southern California or in the boreal forest up in Canada and and maybe in Scandinavia as well. You get an analogous material up there, like spruce roots or something. You're only going to get where you get spruce trees, but spruce trees are quite widespread. So that's probably still quite a baseline skill to have. But then other things, it's very particular to that place. Some of the plants that grow in Australia only grow in particular parts of Australia and they don't grow anywhere else in the world. And unless you know that plant and how to use it, then you're not going to be able to transpose that knowledge from somewhere else to that particular plant. Which one. And then when you get onto foods, it's very much the case, again, some are very widespread, like cattails or bulrushes or, whatever you want to call them, Tifa latifolia, very widespread. That's a plant you'd want to know early on, because you find it in lots of places. And very similar species, kumbungi, that's, you get that in Australia, you get similar species in South Africa. And so those are the things you want to know first. But then once you get beyond those very widespread plants, you've got to kind of know the particular local environment, like which plant has it that has a root that has these poisonous beetles on that you can collect to make a toxin for your bow hunting, for example, in parts of Africa, or, where are we going to find witchetty grubs in Australia? Those are not skills that you can apply in Quebec, for example, but some of the bushcraft skills are. So some of it's very broad based. And I would say in some ways, the most important bushcraft skills have become the ones that you can apply pretty much anywhere where there are woody, fibrous plants and whatnot. But then you get more and more specific to the environment. So, and of course, clearly then when you start thinking about it, there are massive overlaps with survival skills because they allow you to survive even if you don't want to be there. But I would say the distinction with bushcraft skills are that they allow you to be comfortable. The scary wilds become home when you have enough bushcraft skills, even if you're not used to being in that particular environment. So I would say, that's where wilderness living skills comes into that. Not sure, there's kind of, in some ways that's a broader term still, is knowing how to put up a tent, is that a wilderness living skill? Is knowing how to, I don't know, cross a river, is that bushcraft or is that a wilderness living skill? I don't know. There's a sort of gray area there. And in some senses, it doesn't matter. I think what matters is that you know how to do the stuff that you want to be able to do. And you get good instruction, good training. You get mentored by people who know what they're doing, whether they're old hands, that have learned the hard way in the bush, or whether they've been through an established, system of training, like in, water sports or what have you that we have now. You don't want to be learning by mistake how to, canoe down a whitewater river. You want to learn from somebody who knows what they're doing, and then hopefully you then pass that on to other people. So, but anyway, I mean, yeah, it's interesting. But to me, at the heart of bushcraft, it's a knowledge of nature. It's a knowledge of nature, and it is practical knowledge of nature. So it's a knowledge of how to use these things in a practical fashion. So you're not like a botanist where you're interested in everything from a notate, you want to note it down and study it from a scientific point of view. You want to know, okay, well, that is a particular type of plant, or that's a particular type of tree, or that's the track of a particular animal. And then you want to make practical use of that for your own material benefit, for your own physical well-being, to feed yourself, to feed your family, to whatever. It's about that practical use of a knowledge of nature. It doesn't mean to say you shouldn't have a scientific, curious mindset and all of those sorts of things, but fundamentally it's a deep knowledge and study of nature combined with practical skills. And that's the thing. It isn't just knowing how to do things or knowing that you can do things. It's actually practicing them as well. It's like you can read a magazine article and know that you can turn particular types of wood by rubbing them together into a pile of hot dust. And then you can take that pile of hot dust and take some of the fibrous plant materials and blow that into a flame. And then you can take some small sticks from a tree and make that into a fire. It's very different knowing that you can do that to actually being able to do it. And
it's
so
a world apart.
it's a world apart. Yeah. That's, that's one of the things that I get a little bit frustrated with sometimes. There's a raft of YouTube material now with all these skills on, and there are people watching it who, because they've watched it, they think they know how to do it. And I think that's a dangerous trap to get into. Now, a little knowledge can go a long way sometimes, and there are certainly survival stories of people who've had like half a day's classroom survival training, and that saved their lives. So I'm not saying it's totally useless to know about the fact that you can do something, but really what you want is to then practice the skills as well, so that you're getting over the pitfalls and the learning process, and you're getting the muscle memory and all those other things that you need. So I think the craft part sometimes gets left out. The craft part of bushcraft is really important, that you can use a knife safely. We've seen some of these survival shows where people have been extracted from the show quite early on because they've injured themselves with a cutting tool or what have you. And, there's a foundational level of competence that you need in using things, not losing them, keeping things attached to your person, not cutting yourself. That's just basic tool use. And then there's all the knowledge of nature that you need to have practiced.